Hey there, you're listening to Switch On, a podcast to shape the principles of modern leadership. I'm Helena Mach, and I'll be discussing real experience with successful leaders. Learn from them. How are they dealing with the challenges of today, and how are they building on their learnings for tomorrow's success? In this series, we will focus on leadership principles, where you can find yourself in a situation when you can bend the world to your will, yet you find yourself in a paradox. Welcome to this episode of Switch On. The only constant in the world is change. If we only think about how much different is our life than it was 10 years ago, how different do you think the next 10 years will be? Leadership and life are about reinvention. How we are today will not be who we are tomorrow. There are too many variables beyond our field of control. However, life rewards those who are prepared. The market continues to value those organizations that take calculated risks and proactively strive to create a successful future. People who live the most fulfilling lives are those willing to make changes and challenge conventional wisdom. If you stand still, others will pass you by, and life will eventually run you over. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Ina Kukovič Borovnik, an inspiring speaker and a founder of Bela Voda, a community that serves leadership development for the world we want to live in. Ina is also the first certified Chief Reinvention Officer Practitioner and a member of We Exist Reinvention agency that builds our capabilities and enables the transformation of unexpected challenges into opportunities by embracing change. Welcome, Ina.
Thank you, Helena. Nice to be here.
Great to have you with us. Ina, your story didn't start with reinvention. Tell us more. What has brought you to where you are today, and how come you have joined this momentum?
When I tell this story, it usually starts that I realize now I've always been a reinventor, as we all are, luckily. Reinvention, or the capacity to adapt to change, is our natural skill. It's our natural given skill. It's just not natural to the way we do things, to the way that most of our systems and processes are set up until now. And I always tell the story of how many times I felt I don't fit into a certain profession, or I didn't find that one call or one thing that would excite me. And I just kept on exploring. So I actually started off as a lawyer, studying law, because I was super interested in big systems and regulations and how can we change behavior through structures. And after finishing law school, I felt I want to be more on the ground, and I didn't want to practice law itself. I went into business. And somehow ended up in China, where I was co-founding a consultancy company, a social enterprise actually, because we had our own NGO also, dealing with sustainable strategies, green product development, as it was called back then, or still is, however, greening supply chains, etc. And it was an exciting time to be doing that. And I've learned a lot of it from scratch, right? So it wasn't like coming in as an expert, but really as an explorer. And then after a few years of living in China and experiencing this field, I really missed my own country, our little green Slovenia. I missed more space. I started cherishing nature and good food, organic food, a lot more. And also I got an invitation actually from the Prime Minister at the time to join his cabinet and work for him. And that was a big enough push to say, okay, I'm leaving China and I'm going to go and work in politics. And again, most of the things I started learning from scratch. It was a very scary moment. Or as they say it, don't do it if you're not scared enough of it, because then it's not a challenge that's big enough for you. But this one was, So I stayed then, I came back to my own country, to Slovenia, our country, Helena, and I started working in politics for a couple of years then. Great experience, lots of learnings. My biggest drive here was, how can I change things top down? But again, after a couple of years, I decided that's not a field I want to stay in. I want to learn, again, something different, more, and change my path. So I did. I went on and I studied MBA and wanted to work for a big corporation, wanted to go into a big business system to understand more and see how I can kind of reflect my experiences and gain more within that environment. But I like to reinvent hard when I do it, so that same year I got married and I got pregnant with my first baby. So that was a lot of change. And I ended up then with Bela Voda as my consultancy company, as we talked about. And I thought, okay, it seems it's time to write my own story. And it also felt, this is where I landed in this reinvention community, if you want. That felt like my community. This is what I have been doing for most of my career. I've been collecting experiences and knowledge from different fields, and that finally became my advantage, not my disadvantage, in a sense of not being a specialist in one field. And here I am today, bringing this philosophy, theory, tools, frameworks to the world, to organizations, to individuals, as part of what I do.
Wow, what a journey of learning and constantly pushing the boundaries. I got the impression that change was always a part of your life. And I think the future is made for leaders who don't just rebuild, but reinvent. Already Machiavelli wrote, the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities. Though the tendency is to reduce the anxiety by restoring familiar routines, procedures, and traditions. The problem is that businesses, as we knew it, cannot be recovered. Companies will need to reinvent themselves. Why do you think people are so afraid of embracing the change? Why are they so reluctant to test, try, and learn out of it?
Yeah, the golden question, Helena, right? When you talk about change management, or, like, why is it that we talk so much about change? But there's somehow lacks that leap forward of making it, of going into the unknown, of not knowing what the end result will be, right? And there are many reasons, and I do want to put out two specifically for this. And one is, we talked about this before, it's very biological. I mean, we as human beings, as a version of Homo sapiens in 21st century, as we count it, are organisms who are taking their own time to develop and evolve. And a very big part of evolution is fear of something new, right? Because fear of something new meant, if you imagine me and you now, tens of thousands of years ago, living in a little cave, and we would be talking, and I would have to go out and fetch some food. It would be very dangerous, because maybe it's a new cave and we don't know what are the animals outside, who else is hunting, what's the food available, etc. And that's very primal fear of survival, right? If there's something new out there, you don't know what it is exactly, you don't know how you will react to it. It's natural to be afraid. And it's good to be afraid, because imagine that you don't care that there's danger out there, or that there's change around you. You become very passive, and also it's very dangerous to die off, if you want, on the same level as it is if you are afraid too much, right? So there's this sweet spot of overcoming this biological fear. And with that, we have this rule of 90 seconds. That this biological reaction to change or something new lasts for 90 seconds. That means that when something dangerous is happening around you, there's a change, literally your heart starts pumping the blood into your arms, so for fighting, or into your legs for flying away, literally. And after that 90 seconds, you breathe in, and we have this capacity to assess the situation and say, okay, I'm here, this is happening, this is what I can do, and then you can move on. I know a lot of people who get stuck in these 90 seconds. I know a lot of organizations who get stuck in these 90 seconds. I know a lot of countries who get stuck in these 90 seconds, right? So overcoming this biological state, if you want, is essential. And then the other part of this, let's say, not embracing change is how we were taught in our schools. And I'm sure, Helena, we share most of the experience that's very similar. That is that when we got to school, our first grade, we were taught to sit down, to listen, and wait if we will get a chance to ask a question. And when we will get a chance to ask a question, we were also taught to really think hard to make a smart or a good question, right?
Right.
So that's very, very much engraved in our thinking. You know, it's so easy to talk about, yeah, just go on, just try, just prototype, just make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, if you have been punished, or let's just say not encouraged to really make mistakes throughout your educational system, it's going to be very hard to just jump into an organization and start making them carelessly for the sake of reinvention, right? So it's very good to know that this is in us, this part of how we were taught to think around a problem. Yeah.
So true. I didn't know about 90 seconds, though. I didn't know before that those were so crucial, and it's important to survive those, breathe in, breathe out, and then react.
Literally. I mean, you know, it's the 3 times breath, right? Just deep inhale and exhale. You know, yoga is also part of my journey. Breathing is essential to relax these chemical and biological processes. And as a cliche as it sounds, do breathe in when you have and when you are embracing any kind of change around you first, and then start reacting. Yeah.
So let's grab the bull by the horns. Do you like the change?
I love this question, Helena. I also pose it a lot of times when I'm speaking and kind of provoking. I love change. I do. I really do. And with that to say, I also like structure and some grounds that do stay the same. So very practical in my life. I'm very, maybe that's very Slovenian also, Helena. We have a lot of discussions around that. But there's a base, you know, a family, a home, wherever that is and however it looks. That's very important to me. And I do kind of, it's one of those things, as we call it in reinvention. You need to know what you do not want to change, right? So you don't want to change everything at once all the time, because you're going to go mad. Literally, it's impossible to be in such a state all the time. So there's some structures, there's some fundamentals, and some things you're really good at, you do not want to let go of. So those are also the ones that I'm not inclined of changing, or at least not changing fast. But then everything else for me, it's like, yeah, it's very much embracing the change. It's very much about being curious all the time of, interesting, I haven't thought about that. How could I? What can I learn from it? I was really raised up with this curiosity, which I think is such an essential, I don't even want to call it skill, but just openness, I guess, that I would literally invite everyone to nurture your curiosity. Yeah.
Fully agree. The changes are actually inevitable, and you said it so well when you said we need to learn dealing with them. You're so right. But it's not only about us as individuals. We are also part of communities. We are part of different organizations where we are sort of gathering different inputs. We are also exposed to different, let's say, movements, new ideas, new insights. And enterprises are complex, and these are important times. It's important how we pivot as individuals and organizations. But what is even more important today is we need to act now. In a few years, it could be too late, and we will be trying to catch up. Once you mentioned that all the systems around us are showing cracks, and we need to be radical and create forms that were never there. And when you talk about reinvention, you mentioned the importance of a healthy heartbeat, that it's not about simply taking the red pill, but we need to figure out how to live in a new reality. Tell us more.
Yeah, thanks for the question. There's so much I would love to say or in response to it. So just bear with me and ask more, Helena, or stop me if I divert. But
Sure.
maybe first I want to address this whole let's say dualism of individuals versus organizations, right? There's no separation. And I know it doesn't feel logical. It feels very natural, I would say. But so many times and in so many ways when we are addressing changes, we kind of divide that, right? And it's actually undividable, right? There's such a codependence between how I am and how the organization is. I mean, what is an organization? And I know this is a little bit of philosophical diversion here,
It's people,
but
right?
you know, it's people, exactly. And each person is a complex organism, and all together of us are even a bigger one, right? So definitely influencing each other all the time. So kind of cutting yourself off, and I know you didn't meant it that way, but I just felt it's such an important thing to say here also, that there is no one and then the whole. It's all kind of interdependent all the time, right? And I want to definitely address this timing of, you know, when to reinvent, or how to respond to change, right? It's $1 million question, when to reinvent, right? I could explain it with this S curve that most of the listeners, I'm sure, are also familiar with, of an evolution of a business model or a product or a service, right? So there's a startup phase, there's a growth phase, maturity phase, and then decline, right? And the ideal time to kind of reinvent would be in the growth phase, before you become mature, before you reach those cash cow years, as we used to call them, or we call them, but it's not years anymore, it's months and days, right? So it's becoming very speedy. And a lot of the times we miss the timing, yeah? So that's why it's very important to divert and have a variety of reinvention projects in the pipeline, if you want, from small ones to system change ones, that we hit the target on some of them, right? So that in terms of timing, I think it's important, but also I want to speak, it's impossible to avoid the topic of pandemics, right? It's been a year of life living with this virus, and we will continue to live with it either way. But an interesting fact is, you know, World Economic Forum every year puts out a report of, you know, the biggest risks that they evaluate every year globally, right? And a pandemics has been on top 10 of the risks for the past few years, especially last year. But somehow the world was shocked, or we were shocked, and nobody was ready for something like a total lockdown, or the possibility of how do we vaccinate, or how do we organize differently, how do we work remotely, etc., right? And let me just tell you that on those top 10 risks, there's things like, you know, unstable financial markets. There are things of lack of resources, essential resources. There's lack of biodiversity. There's climate change. There's all sorts of risks that are not new in our conversations, right? But yet organizations are taking a very long time to respond, to reinvent, because they are out there, they're in the sea of change. And somehow we keep on acting from what we call in our reinvention community, the Titanic syndrome, you know, the great story of Titanic, of being the biggest, the largest, the unsinkable ship, right? That didn't sink because they hit the iceberg, right? There are many, many, many reasons why they sank. And at the end, hitting that iceberg, right? And it's a very, I keep using this metaphor now also biologically, saying it's not just Corona, it's Titanic syndrome we should be afraid of, because there is reinvention beyond pandemics that needs to be happening in the same urgency than pandemics, right? We did the firefighting now, but you can't firefight forever. And there's more of this kind of risks coming to reality in the next decade, as you mentioned in your introduction. And we need to literally get our hands dirty, because otherwise we're gone. We're gone. The prediction is that half of the best companies in the world right now are going to be gone in the next decade, right? So the ones we look up to now as being the best ones for whatever reasons.
But before moving on, I think we need to look at the other side of the coin as well. To move forward, we need to also say no to certain things. How do we say no to things that we have invested a lot of time and energy in? How do we recognize what is no longer serving us? What if there is something we pretend we don't want to know, that we pretend that it's okay?
Titanic syndrome again, the pretending it's okay and we got this. But I actually want to tie this in to this metaphor you mentioned before. That's my favorite one when I talk about reinvention. That's this heartbeat, right? If you imagine a heartbeat drawn, you know, there's a sinusoidal, right? There's an up and down all the time, right? That's life. You don't want to keep it stable and predictable because you're dead. It's a flat line. You're dead, right? And it's also how do you keep it healthy? That's the question I want to tie into the no part, right? It's you need to go and do your exercise, whatever you're doing to keep your physical heartbeat healthy. Yourself, and you need to do it regularly, and you need to also change it because otherwise your body gets used to it too much, right? But you also don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to like, oh, this works for me, I'm gaining my condition, I'm gonna do 10 more of these just because I can and it seems to be working. There's this part of saying no, because when it's gonna be too much, it's not gonna be healthy on the long run for you, right? And this is something that we get caught up in, I guess. I mean, it's great to be in this ride, you know, when everything goes up and you feel like you can do more and more and more and more, but you can't do more and more and more forever. There's an end line, right? Especially in living systems that we are. When you just need to say, no, we can't. We don't have the energy anymore. Look, my team this year has done X of reinvention projects. We successfully this much and unsuccessfully this much, but it's enough. We don't do more because we're going to burn out. Very simple. And I'm sure you have heard a lot of burnout stories after this year.
Yeah.
That were very much connected to firefighting, but then also to reinvention. Yeah.
Yeah. We are hearing a lot about individuals being overwhelmed by the change, and a lot of them are actually dealing with it. And you said it so well when you said we can only do so much. But in these periods of discontinuity, companies often take a step back to rethink what they are doing, and they need to actually prioritize what they want to be doing going forward. And I see a lot of enterprises that I have spoken to over the years about transition and transformation, where there was really a lot of discussion and dipping toes into the water, but not moving. So many of those enterprises have now gone from talk to having a real plan. But as you mentioned earlier, it's not a one-time project, is it? It's an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely. I mean, change is not a project. I mean, we made it a project somewhere in between, but it's a process. It's an ongoing process. It's a way of being differently, of doing and thinking about our strategy differently, about any project differently. And what we use a lot of times that's very beneficial to organizations is the so-called reinvention canvas. That helps you see or line up all of the reinvention projects that you have in the pipeline and divide them in terms of the scope and the impact in terms of how much time and money and people you need to invest to make it happen. And, you know, if you can imagine this on two premises, if you have like a nice diversity all over the canvas, that feels like a healthy environment where you can kind of cope with, your team can cope with it, your budget can cope with it. And if there's too much intensification on just one part, or you just want to, you know, change 5 systems, 5 ecosystems at once, you're gonna burn out. It's not going to work, even if you really, really want it to work, you know, and you have a great idea and you probably even have the solutions and people to do it, but not enough, because it's impossible to absorb so much of change in your organization to thrive, right? So it's not about just surviving one change. It's about thriving in constant chaos, right? We actually live in constant chaos all the time, which sounds maybe radical, but it's really not. I mean, it's part of, as you said, change being the constant. We all know where we are going within it. It looks like a mess, but actually we each have a plan within it. So embracing that is important. Yeah.
In this ongoing process of awareness, anticipation, creativity, innovation, constantly learning, this constant reinvention that you are talking about requires also a mix of culture, technology, ambition. It requires really embracing that our reality is changing now practically daily. And I would assume that it's not enough only to have visionary leaders that pull and direct the vision forward, but we need a whole organization to recognize the sense and the potential to be able to respond, right?
Absolutely.
And reinvention as a mindset, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an ongoing process. I would say an organism in evolution in itself for each organization on its own. I know it sounds complex, but it's much more real if I would say, oh yeah, I have this CD or whatever downloadable app of 5-step process that if everyone in the organization will do the same way, you got it. And then you just start doing it and you'll be reinventing, learning organization all the time. It doesn't work that way. We are not machines. We're living organisms that adapt to a certain fact, each one on our own. And I think that's a very important message to give, because for all the 5-step processes out there, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying you should take them with your own perspective and see what could potentially work for you or not. There is no one solution for everyone. And this is very much a message within the ever evolving and learning reinvention mindset that I think it's, important to nurture and learn.
Very
again.
Yeah, very important point that you're raising, because the companies are actually turning today. And how do you see they're using this momentum, what is happening around us, as a launchpad to really embed this motion, this thought process in their day-to-day, simply to become better, to become sustainable, to actually become flexible enough to maintain this momentum of embracing constant change and the shift that they need to achieve in people.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm taking a pause just because I want to kind of gather maybe the most important points that I see. First of all, what I see from the past year mostly is that organizations just were firefighting, so not really reinventing. Firefighting, dealing with this immediate situation that was supposedly not expected at all, just literally surviving, right? So although there was a chance to go beyond that, and still is, I think this is a longer process than 1 year, I miss organizations being more radical. I'm going to go back to that one question that you posed, being more radical in what people are capable of doing in terms of what they do as in the industry, which industries could potentially be more overlapping, which industries could be new in all, how we can work together. I mean, remote work has been such a topic, right, this past year. And yet we've been, again, talking about it and kind of trying to adapt to it for quite some time before this pandemic year, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, let's go beyond this firefighting now, and the fact that most of the things that were supposedly reinvented in the past year were done so because they really needed to happen, right? So it was kind of like, let's just jump and let's make this parachute fast and we'll survive. Great. And I'm happy for all the ones that did survive, because there's going to be a lot of, I think, switch offing in the next year for sure, because it will not be sustainable anymore. But I just want to invite and say, look beyond this situation now and use it to really think around possibilities that were never there before, or maybe sounded too radical for your organization or your team or your industry. Now is the time that you can really try them and leap over. So really going into more radical directions. I think this is the time when you can afford that more than ever, when we can all afford that more than ever. Yeah.
You're so right. I mean, firefighting is overwhelming, and there is really so much that we can do in 24 hours, let's say, and people are tired. But even change is changing. And with this speed of change growing exponentially, the connectivity that you are mentioning, the development and looking forward are really so crucial. And earlier you mentioned that COVID is just one of the tests that we are bound to meet, and there are others to come, equally complex and equally challenging. This sort of stops me. And I need to ask, is there a model or a system that we can adopt and then follow it for a certain period of time? I mean, we could also say 10 years, which seems like an eternity right now. But nevertheless, is there any concrete guidance that we can maybe use to orient ourselves going forward?
Yeah, I'll start with the speed of change. For what we know, this is the fastest changing environment that humanity as we are ever lived in the history of humankind. You know, when you say it in a sentence, you're like, yeah. But really, like, you know, things that, and ways that change in just past 6 decades, that's nothing. 6 decades ago, it was the first time we took a picture of our planet Earth from space, a colored picture of our planet Earth in space. It's not such a long time ago, and a lot has changed, and we are simply not following or not capable of dealing with so much of it. But we can, on our rational or mental level, I don't want to say just rational, mental and emotional level, we can. And that's an intro to say that the first thing in my experience in my work in reinvention is that just starting to talk about this reality, being aware of it, not just kind of, yeah, we need to change. Oh, I wish, like these conversations then on hallways, that now finally the management knows what we're doing and we'll stay on this track, right? For some time and peace be with it. But to have built up this rational and emotional capacity of knowing this is not gonna stop from today to tomorrow, that this is a period that, me and you can only guess how long will last, but that we need to build up this resilience in our thinking and doing for ourselves and organizations is step one. And then in terms of a system, yes, we have a few frameworks, as we call them. We have a few canvases that help you and your organization start the conversations that are needed to build up your own reinvention system, right? So to know when within the industry you are in, within the size of the company, within the culture that you have, is a good kind of cycle to bring in new reinvention projects, and when it is not, how to then implement them in an efficient way. And that's why I keep saying there are frameworks and canvases that help you develop your own system and your own timing, right? Because a cycle in mining industry is probably going to be a lot longer than a cycle in an IT industry, right? And sure. I'm taking now, two, but also a cycle in tourism versus transport, or entertainment versus, I don't know. So it wouldn't be fair to say, oh, everyone needs to reinvent every 3.5 years. This is what our global survey is saying, right? That in average, throughout all industries, this is the pace. But it doesn't really need to be. It might not be for your organization. It's just a part of saying it needs to be more frequent than it probably was before. So if reinventions on a bigger scale for organizations used to be every decade, they're definitely now every 3 to 5 years, right? But how do you function? How do you establish processes within your organization? This is a system. It does have a framework from the why, what, and how approach that I'm sure you're familiar with, also from Simon Sinek. And this is kind of the core part, or like a core framework that we build on then slowly. Yeah. And I'm surprised how many times conversations get stuck on very fundamental questions. Why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve? And then, the how. We all think we just need the how. We don't just need the how. We're very unclear on the first two questions. And we are very quick on implementing, maybe too fast, each in our own way. Yeah. So clarity and unification within the organization when it comes to reinvention systems, I think is from my experience right now, a bigger challenge than I thought. Yeah.
Very well put. I fully agree. I mean, answering those questions to gain this clarity, I would say it's crucial. And it seems we all need to become more flexible and adaptable in everything that we do. But how do you manage the change? What motivates you? What makes you alive? What makes you curious enough to even open your mind?
It's such a self-reflecting question. And having a chat before, I was thinking, what really inspires me to keep on being curious and embracing the change is nature. I mean, we are nature, but observing nature around me, as in humans and as in woods and plants and my garden, if you want, is a big inspiration for me to know that, you can put 10 seeds of carrots in and maybe only 3 will actually grow into something. And maybe 1 year they will taste great, and maybe 1 year they will hardly grow and be something. And that's kind of a constant reminder and inspiration for me on, there's always a space to learn. Be careful not to be too arrogant in what you're saying. Don't be too sure in the numbers you're looking at. Keep asking better questions. Is kind of then, I would say, a learning or a drive for me personally. So yeah, I guess observing life, as philosophical as it sounds, but is a good motivator to keep on learning. And that doesn't mean, Helena, that I don't get tired. We had this conversation. Reinvention in itself, takes a lot of energy. And it's just, when you're tired, you need a rest.
Sure.
And take it. Take it. Don't feel like you need to keep on going beyond what's in you at this moment. Yeah.
Ina, I really like how embracing the change means for you actually freedom to explore, to breathe, to being free from expectations. It sounds more like a gift. Usually we don't consider change from this perspective. Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
What I appreciate about this is making me think also about evergreen. What do you think we'll never need to change?
A very challenging question. And in one way, my first response when I was thinking about this question was, there's nothing that never changes. Nothing or no one, or because, everything is moving this way or the other. You never step into the same river twice, right? Even if the river is in the same space. I hope that some principles of life, of what makes life happen, will not change. Meaning, one of the essential principles in our living system is that life creates conditions for life to happen. So I guess that's something I hope will never change, and that we will nurture that, because otherwise I don't know who are we in a long term. But everything else or anyone else, I don't see staying the same ever. Yeah.
What a beautiful metaphor. Life creates conditions for the life to happen. Wow, really inspiring metaphor. You gave me a cue earlier, and I would like to follow up on that. Actually, it was Nadia Jeksembayeva in her latest book, How to Thrive in Chaos. She says, the challenge we face isn't about trying to survive until things stabilize, but rather about learning to thrive in constant chaos. That happens only when we accept that change is no longer a project and build a well thought out reinvention system that works. We all like the order, guidance, direction, purpose, and now suddenly this is gone. How to thrive in chaos, in your view?
There's lots of philosophies out there that kept on saying this, that we do live in an ever-changing environment. But when we spoke, I also told you that most of our Western managerial and leadership styles in organizational development are based on a mindset and a philosophy from post-World War II world, right? When, we collapsed in a certain way, and we predicted a lot of what will happen in the next trajectory of a few decades, right? A lot could be predicted. We build it up. We rebuild it a system, okay, that had quite known kind of premises and goals, right? We see that a lot of that is not working, right? It's great to have that predictability, but a lot of it is not working. And I think that a lot of these conversations that we're having in terms of thriving in chaos, in terms of organizational development and leadership, comes from this switch, of how do we go away from budgets being fixed for 5 years. Can you imagine, Helena? I mean, this is
Not
funny.
anymore.
Now, this is
Not
extremely
anymore.
funny, even for a country, nevertheless, for any organization, right? And kind of this strategizing, long-term, short-term. I mean, this words have really changed meaning in practicality. And I think that, accepting that, finding our own way of how do we do this now differently is the thriving in chaos part, right? How do we develop 5 different business models for our 5 different customer bases, for, I don't know, Q1 and Q2 and maybe Q3 and 4 are going to be switched differently. Can you imagine that? It's an intensity, but if that becomes normal, right? So we switch the business model. So what, right? Not such a big deal, right? So we reinvent it based on the changed circumstances. It's fine. That it doesn't have to be such a big deal if you want. I mean, I think we talked about changing business models in the past decade a lot, right? That this is a capacity we need to develop, be more fluent in. Of course, there are some that are really great at it, but it's not such a literacy skill yet, yeah? And let's say that's one of them, one of the capacities within reinvention that I'm just pointing out. Yeah.
The reality is that last years were pretty good. Now let's see how to repeat that success for tomorrow. We are due for a crisis. It's not a matter of whether or not the recession will happen. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. It's also about how we prepare for this. What would be your top recommendations? How do we prepare for this to come out of it stronger and on top?
Yeah, first, again, accepting that that's happening. It's happening, right? The number of crises, Nadia gave out this number, and I can double check back for you, but the number of economic crises in the past 40 years or so was 496, Helena. That's a big number. Like, just to kind of say, oh, right, this is happening all the time. We are adapting to this all the time. We will be in need of being more flexible around this market changes. Let's say specifically financial market changes all the time. So step one, if you want, accepting that it's not gonna stop. And I know it's maybe this is kind of a repeated message, but it's so true, for any of these things. It's not gonna be a fixed, controllable environment that you or I will be able to work in. It probably never was, Helena. It's just, I would say, a wake-up call that there's a different reality we live in, and that the time of our control or controllable systems is coming to an end. So yeah, that's one kind of perspective to it. And the second, very practical, is following all sorts of reports. I mean, in terms of reports and analysis and statistics and trends, there's so many good platforms of information out there today that are very reachable, right? This is not like an expensive report you need to pay for. So anyone can read up. That's first. Read up and keep reading up. And second, go beyond what you already know. So if I'm reading 10 links on trends and 10 reports every year, it's really, really good to ask people that are not in my industry, what are they reading? What are they noticing? One very simple advice we give out, this is Nadia's, one of Nadia's ideas, and I love it also. Build your own personal advisory board. What does that mean? That means you think of 4 or 5 people who work outside of your field of work, or they might be somehow connected, but you don't necessarily work with them on projects. You know them, and you know that they have insights and knowledge and experience and views on something different. You reach out to them, ask them to join your personal advisory board that will have a meeting every 3 months. And basically what you do, you just talk to each other. What's new? What are you noticing? What are you reading? What are you seeing? Which courses are you taking? Which conferences are you listening to, etc., etc. And really expand your own perspective, because you'd be surprised, and this is where I need to pinch myself also from time to time, how caught up we get into a certain community, a certain language, a certain pond of resources or facts or informations that start to limit us, because we become too sure of this little bracket that we know very well. We need to constantly reach out and learn beyond what's known and comfortable. Yeah.
Wow, what a powerful message. Ina, it is inspiring to learn from you, and I appreciate how you lighted the spark in me. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom about reinvention. I feel motivated to keep focused on the future and moving forward. And I'm grateful for the conversation. Thank you so much for being our guest on Switch On. It has been a privilege to learn from you.
Thank you, Helena, so much. I have goosebumps when you say there's a spark, and I'm always grateful that I get a chance to talk about this and within this. And I hope there's one message for anyone listening that will stay with him or her after listening. And thank you for holding these conversations. It's a very important part of the transformations we are in for the decade to come. Thank you, Helena.
It was lovely speaking with you. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. It was a real pleasure to have Ina on the show today. I admire her passion for embracing the change and her commitment to contribute by lighting the spark in others and use this opportunity to create a better version of ourselves. Ina said it so well. We need to leverage this opportunity and use these learnings we have gathered. Then really think around the possibilities that were never there before, or maybe sounded too radical. Now is the time to try them out and take the leap. This is the time we can all afford that more than ever. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by Drop of Milk, an impact-driven business consultancy and expert on customer-focused digital transformation. You can learn more at dropofmilk.com.